questions. To what extent, very little to a whole bunch. That's not quite the wording, but you get the idea. It's across a continuum here. We have there's an item on NESE from the very beginning, and it's this first one, voting in local state. This is the Pew Charitable Trust's memorial item. So you get a bunch of money, and they say, sure would be nice to know something about it. Oh yeah, that fits right in that list there, and so fits right in that list. Happy to do it. But this contributing to the welfare of the community, very, very important way of, recall the humanitarian allocentric, something I'm still stuck on from the 60s. And then we also ask students, to what extent have you developed your sense of spirituality? And the spirituality question is very broad. Going from attending worship, religious practices to meditation, maybe not as well defined, I'm sure, as what you all did, Chick, in your work, but students seem to get it, and we'll show you some patterns here in a little bit. Okay, some hard to interpret charts, but simple messages. So here we have the great the old Carnegie classification scheme, the simple one, the one that's still stuck in most of our minds. These measures I've just been talking about, we add them all together. You stick them all together, and we get this global indicator of, quote, character development. To what extent do students at different types of institutions, a la Carnegie, report greater gains across this general domain of character development? And we have standardized scores on the vertical axis here, and we're showing these bars for each type of institution represent about 80% of the distribution of scores. Where you lop off the top 10, lop off the bottom, lop off the bottom, lop off the... Just want to be sure you're sticking with me. And the red square, is the arithmetic average of the score aggregated across all students at these types of institutions. And so the takeaway from this, two takeaways, I guess. One is that the baccalaureate liberal arts college is the so-called highest scoring, you would say, is developing the most character. You don't want to say that, but and again, we don't have controls here for predisposition and so on and so forth. So you see that set of institutions performing a little bit higher than the back general. And by the way, the back general category, and I'm going to come back to this in a little bit, has an overrepresentation of what are we calling them? Faith-based colleges. Those tightly connected to the denominations that have a strong allegiance to the doctrine of their denomination. Well, so that's what you got there. Really no big surprise. What the surprise is, well, maybe not a surprise, but just something to remind ourselves of, even though it's been in the literature for a long, long time. When you look at individual institutions, on average, some score higher than others. But look at this middle school in the back liberal arts category. So it has a higher than average score on, quote, character development. But look at the range. So you've got a lot of students at that institution who are leaving that place, I shouldn't say untouched, but certainly saying hasn't had much of effect here at all across this list of outcomes. I mean, the ranges are significant in every type of institution and at every institution within each type. And so when we think about our own work, who is it at our places, and I'm going to come back to this toward the end, who is it that either has access to or we are reaching out to with the kinds of activities, programs, practices where we are more likely to get them to reflect on their thinking, more likely to get them to act in ways for the betterment of the public good. It's a simple point, you can forget about it, it's not important, except that when you go back home, you ought to be thinking about who's getting the good stuff and who isn't, and why might that be? Is it about accentuation effects or something else? So now just a couple, 3 slides to break this down and look at individual behaviors, or we call them individual outcomes. And so when we ask people on NESE, we say, To what extent, right? From the highest very much to down to very little. On the far right here, we have the item about developing a personal code of ethics and values. And so we got a glass half full or a glass half empty. You know, we've got almost, what, 3/5 of students who say they have quite a bit or very much developed this personal code. Now, we may not believe it, but in their mind's eye, they think this is happening to them, right? Well, you can draw your own conclusions from the Pew Memorial item here, voting. This gets, as other surveys show, this gets huge spikes in election years, where bumps way up. Bump was huge in 08 after the elections, or that year. College students, as you might guess, were saying they were. It doesn't make any sense as a gain item, but it is what it is. It's there and so on. All right, it looks like it's dropped off the screen here, but this first column on the left is deepened sense of spirituality. Remember that point I made a little bit ago that we do ask students to what extent they think college has contributed to. And you can see here about half the students say hardly any. Hardly any. This, of course, differs across different types of institutions. The middle bar contributing to the welfare of the community, then self-understanding. You see many more students saying it's really had an effect on me. So these are students, seniors, by the way. That's what we're showing here, seniors. And you see very similar patterns with first-year students. In fact, on some of these things, first-year students report doing more of it. Now, I'm going to shift around here. You know, what's one reason why students may or may not be reporting outcomes in these areas? And the old argument is if students don't do things, they don't benefit in the ways in which you'd expect them because they haven't done them. So this is the percent of students who say they've never done something. Last night we were talking about number of courses, service learning courses. Well, we got almost half the students saying they've been in at least one or more of these kinds of settings where they've been in a course which has had some connection to the local community. And almost everybody says they've been introduced to diverse perspectives in class. I'm sorry, it's falling off the bottom of the screen here, but that middle bar is the frequency with which they have been introduced in class to readings from different points of view and so forth and so on. Turns out it's that single item, very powerful item in terms of predicting lots of desired outcomes. And it's one of the reasons that liberal arts colleges the small liberal arts colleges look so good, even on more global questions about experiences with diversity. Even these places that have relatively little structural diversity, meaning not so many people from different racial, ethnic backgrounds, that item tends to drive strong scores. Okay. Fewer students study abroad. That's what you'd expect. And again, on the far right here, the extent to which people say they have participated in spirituality activities, meditating, worship services, and so on. Okay, so for me anyway, looking at individual schools, one of the first things I do is to look at nevers. Because if someone's never doing it, the odds are pretty darn good they're not going to benefit in any kind of associated way. And so stamping out nevers is a key toward improving the undergraduate experience, at least institution-wide. We did something a few years ago, article appeared in Liberal Education, Bob Gagne and I, where actually it was the Teagle Foundation that was very interested in this, and shame on us, we didn't introduce the spirituality item until we heard that UCLA was doing a lot of stuff with spirituality. And so we had this one item, two items, one on the behavior side, one item on the outcome side, the deepened sense of spirituality. And so there was how to put this in a gentle way. There still is a serious question, I think, among academics, and Sandy, Lenny, you may be talking more about this, as to whether this is legitimate. And we've talked about this a little bit yesterday. Should we be mucking around in this stuff like spirituality, or let's let me make it pejorative in terms of this choir. Or should we retain